Hello, welcome back. Today we are doing chapter 37, and as you will see, it is also the very beginning of part 3. Viking. So then, part 3, Viking. Chapter 37, 1048. It felt good to be king. Harald sat in the hall in Norway and held court over his kingdom. He was surrounded by sycophants, guardsmen, courtiers, lords, and jarls. Everyone around looked to him for rule. They feared him. They lusted after his power. They wanted him dead. They wanted him to live for 1,000 years. They wanted his throne. They wanted him dead. They wanted him king. It all felt so damn good. It was good to be king, and Harold was king. It had been more than a year since his deal with King Magnus the Good, and half a year past his great victory over the ghost raiders who'd been apparently savaging both their forces. That had yet to be fully explained. When questioned about what they wanted, the few survivors had simply responded that they'd wanted war. Well, they had gained their prize, but Harold won the war. After the early victory there, Harold and Magnus had been touring the country together in a show of unity and to demonstrate their shared rule. They'd attended feasts and collected taxes and tribute, but also disseminated some small measure of their great wealth among the people of Norway. The unity was presented. The jarls and lords were placated, and the message was well received. The war is over, and the kings are in control. In each and every instance, of course, Magnus had shown himself to be the greater among the kings, always taking no moment to show himself at all lesser or subordinate to Harold. This treatment chafed at Harold, but he bid his time. Knowing his rule would count for much, no matter. Their differences were of no import, though, when they both planned to join together on an expedition south and go campaigning against Harold's former ally Svein Ulfsson. The combined forces and wealth they mustered for the assault was immense, and they made terrible war on the Danish lands, earning for themselves even more money. The united armies had fought hard and won. They'd fought hard and lost. It was a war that they both knew they wouldn't be able to win or abandon for many years, and so resolved themselves to the constant fight that must come every summer. Then everything was thrown into upheaval in one glorious and fated night. Harold had been sitting on his ship considering the next attack against his old friend when he received word that Magnus the Good, co-ruling king of Norway, had died. All at once, everything changed for Harold. Everything. When he came to the retinue of Magnus, they were read the statement that the king had declared. He'd told them all that Harold was to inherit Norway and all its treasure, but Svein was to retain all of Denmark. Harold didn't care at all what was said about Svein or Denmark. He quit the campaign immediately and sailed north with the whole host of the dead king's entourage, who carried with them the body. Denmark could be dealt with later. Norway was his to deal with now. That had been in October. Winter was about to set the north to oppressive freezing, and Harold wanted rather to be in the warmth and comfort that could only be afforded a king. He slept with beautiful women, ate the finest quality food, drank barrels of the best liquor, and bedecked himself with jewelry and finery. He had an overbearing surplus of everything, and it was perfect. Every moment of this power and opulence felt good. This night, he'd gathered all the most powerful landlords and nobles to his hall for a feast. Harald Sigurdsson was, after all, the king of all Norway. Not a shared rule, but a single and vastly rich king. His invitation to a feast was something that none would dare refuse. And in fact, he'd had numerous minor lords clamoring to attend. All seemed to know that with the changing of a king came the moment to set the world for their future if they had the means to do it. The food was served, and all ate and drank heartily. Showing power in the north meant feasting, and Harold wanted all to know that his was going to be the strongest the kingdom had ever been. Lavish gifts were distributed among the attendees as well to further this message, but finest among any gifts made was the invitation to feast in this fine hall. Harold had ordered the construction of this hall as soon as he learned of Magnus's death. He'd sent forth messengers to this place of Onslow, which had only been established 8 years prior. Harold had designs on making it a renowned trade port, as it was in the perfect location and a place from which he could demonstrate power. The hall was called King's Seat, for its construction was among the first acts he'd made as our king, and the skill that went into the building was apparent. Everything about the hall had been made with warmth in mind. It was broad and spacious, with many tables and a long meal fire running a channel down the center. This was the first feast at King's Seat, and Harold was satisfied it would make for a grand meeting place, as long as his rule lasted. There was music being played, vats of drink laid out, tables for food, and lords to feast. Einar Thambarskelfir, the lord who had always dissented against Harold, sat at a table and watched the king. Harold looked to be in such a pleased state, he was almost convinced the man was drunk, but knew it was his own success and pride he was drunk on. The invitation to this feast had arrived as a surprise, and Einar had accepted it tentatively. He knew not how much this King Harold knew about his own political past, but therefore judged it a wise decision to assume he knew everything. Einar had been influential in his hostility and leadership among the nobles' opposition to St. Olaf's rule. Harold had, of course, officially derived his legitimacy as king from his connection to the King Olaf. And so anyone who'd been in open support against him could be dangerous. Now he sat and reflected on everything he'd ever done. All his work, all his schemes and plans, his brilliant maneuvers and bribes and meetings, all for nothing. For here sat some foreign man on the throne, a foreign king he had no power or influence over. He wasn't even sure he'd be allowed to survive the night. But that, though, emboldened him. If he was fated to die this night, Einar Thambarskelfir would do all he could to change this kingdom to suit his own power as much as possible. In a den of wolves, pleading did you no good. Only empowering yourself could save your life. I'll attend, called Harold's attendant, also, then, named Einar. The king speaks. All the guards in the hall stomped their halberds upon the floor, an unsubtle demonstration of the power and violence the king was always capable of exerting. Lords of Norway, Harold began slowly. He took a moment to bask in the quiet. His words forced on these powers. My subjects, my friends, thank you all for coming, for making the journey across this windy and cold season to drink my mead. They all laughed, though he knew they didn't mean it. I have chosen this night, so close after Yule, and the holy mass of our Lord Christ, to welcome all the fealty of you, my Norway. For here, sat at my tables and eating my feast, is the very country of Norway. You are Norway, and I am your king. We have made the peace with the death of our former king, my nephew Magnus, and now turn to me for rule. In his last days, for his wisdom and fears, he made me the king of Norway. However, he withheld the lands of the Denmark for another, a man I once called ally, Svein Olfsson. You may all well know that Svein tried to have me killed. Now he sits at the seat of Denmark, the very place he betrayed me in. Now that Magnus has passed and all his rule gone to me, it falls to me to become the wiser, to rule in fairness and good judgment. This I cannot do, else so active a threat resides in the very inheritance I share in. My friends, Magnus was a good king, but he allowed his fear to control him, his thought too often. With my new seat and crown, I take on all powers as your king, and in thus I will reverse the decision to allow the seat of Denmark to be allowed to Svein. I declare here that I will assume the throne of Denmark with my new kingdom of Norway. I, Harold, will rule both, and I will exert my rule on Svein as he has any opposition to this power. Aye! Shouted many from those in the hall. King Harold! Shouted one, and others joined in the chant. And what of our dead king? Einar Thrumbelskerfir asked loud and angrily. What of his decree, his rules, his wishes? He did not rise from where he sat, only spoke loudly, as if to those he sat with. What say you, old Thrumbelskerfir? Asked Harold. Go, man, and stand and speak. Make not some show. Einar took a deep breath and grabbed his drink. Then he stood slowly. By this time, the hall was all quiet, each of the guests looking to him. They all knew him, knew who he was and his noble bearing, and now showed respect to his place. What is a legacy? Asked Einar aloud to the whole room. Oh, Jesus, Harold said quietly, putting a hand to his head. He has a whole performance. His wife to his left, Jarl Ivar to his right, and his attendants were all close enough to hear him, and they chuckled at the quip. Does the legacy of a man live on after he is dead? He asked dramatically to the crowd, seeing that he had their full attention. I say it does. It should. That is the only time a legacy can mean anything. After one's death. What say you of your own legacy? What will you be remembered for? What will I be remembered for? Long speeches, Harold said, and many laughed with him. Einar shot him a glare and waited for the crowd to quiet. Our lives are measured in the echoes we leave after through eternity. I know each here wants their life to mean something, wants our time on this sad earth to be important somehow, to carry meaning. I do. I know that you do too. But we, my friends, are not kings. He then turned and raised his cup to Harold. Our King Harold Sigurdsson is. His legacy will echo through time. His might and renown mean more than mine ever could. But I will not let that be enough to quell my desire for it. Legacy is all we have when we are gone. Our souls are in heaven, our bodies are dust. All that stays here is the voice of others who speak our names. But what good is any of that if we so easily, willingly, he looked Harold deep in the eye, and quickly ignore the legacy of our dead? King Magnus declared what his will should be after his death, I think. He paused meaningfully. That it would be foolish to undo his will so soon. If we respect not the wishes and orders of a king just because he is gone from this earth, especially before his body is interred, then what chance have any of you? Einar Thambar Skelfjord drank from his cup, deep and long, letting the audience digest his words. He could see clearly that he reached them. They listened now, and he loved the feeling of being listened to. His bid for kingship was years done, and he'd never succeeded in that endeavor. But perhaps his statement that the words of men could live on after their death did mean something. I knew Magnus as a boy. I went and sought out a ruler from the lands of Garthariki in the land of the Rus and found the boy there. Excuse me. The son of Olaf, and a boy I knew would grow into a fine ruler. With your guidance, no doubt, said a landlord named Valdur. Some laughed, but few. Einar spent a moment in wistful memory. Yes, I practically raised the boy. I taught him, schooled him, raised him to be a king, and he became king. Do we not call him the good, the godly and virtuous? Einar turned to Harold. He ruled alongside you, not over you or despite you, but with you. My ward, my beloved King Magnus, is now dead, and his body has not yet even been interred. And here are all of you fighting over the scraps. The crowd actually looked chastened a moment at his words. Oh, the magic of the Scots tongue, he thought to himself. His time spent learning to speak was time well used. Now our King Magnus needs burial. But more than that, I declare he needs respect. This king kind of blatant treatment of his life and works will bode ill for this kingdom if it does not go unheeded. So heed me. The body of our beloved king rests outside right now, where the cold will preserve him. I say to all of you, I will take him to the law place of the Trondr people, the Kaupangur of Nidaros. That is where Olaf II, the Saint Olaf, lies entombed, and it is to there that I shall bring the relic of our old dead king. Not shall I sit here and listen as his rulers so easily dismantled it to applause and laughter. So blithely you all forget the life and the works of a man. Shame upon you! May your children treat you with as much respect as you chose to display hence from this day. Einar then made for the door, putting his cup onto a table as he went and speaking no more words to any as he pushed out the doors and exited into the cold night. The hall was quiet, a long time after he was gone. Well, what should I do with him? Asked Harold to the hall. Kill him, one sycophant yelled. Exile, another shouted. Pay his way to Nidaros and say a prayer for King Magnus, said the one noble standing. I will not hear of your calling for execution or exiling a man who shows love and respect to the man who he raised to be a king. The man was red in the face for his rage, as he spoke loudly to quell all other speak. What is your name? Asked Harold, regarding the hugely bearded lord. He turned to the throne and looked his king in the eye, then bowed. I meant you no disrespect, my lord king. I know. I ask you your name, man. What are you called? My name is called Ulrich, lord. I am the Earl of Lade, the North. Harold nodded and stood from where he sat. Then, with all watching, He made his way over to the man and put forth his hand. Then you are king, kin to the Thambar Skelfir. Yes, lord. He is my uncle. The man's expression was unwavering, his stare intense. He stood without flinching and held the king's hand without any hostility or weakness. Harold liked the man immediately. Strength loved strength. Let it be said this man is no coward. He turned from Ulrich then and walked slowly back to his seat. The Thambar Skelfir spoke well, passionately. He loved our old king, as did I. Such a thing as that is no crime. And think you this, were I the sort of king to kill any who disagreed with me, how long would you last in my kingdom? How long would I last? He thought to himself, a sentiment he'd only ever think, privately. He grieves. Let him take the king to the Kaupanger, the city of Nidaros, and lay the king to rest beside his father Olaf. Such a thing is only right to be allowed. I will pray for their safe arrival, and hopefully with a swift departure. This allowed a moment of levity back to the hall, and all laughed. The horrid seriousness had gone on long enough. I wish him Godspeed. I wish him well and safety on the road to my kingdom. And in fact, he spoke as if just now thinking of it, I will send with him tributes to be made on the deathbed of my old co-ruling king, to be laid also with Olaf the Saint. He crossed himself, and all others did the same. Shall I go with him, Lord King? Asked an enthusiastic boy who stood on his chair. He looked familiar to Harold, but he knew not exactly how. Who are you then? Boy, sit down, the Jarl Ivar said from his seat. Who is this, your son? I am called Hakon Ivarson. Long have I wished to see the place of Nidaros and see the great dead kings. Let me go with him, and I shall make such gifts for their glory. And too shall I pray. The boy's eagerness was infectious. He looked to be no more than 20. And then why have you not been to the city before, if so great is your desire to go? Hakon put a foot up upon the table. I was born in the uplands, where my father's lands are my king. Then you well know too these earls of Lade? Asked Harold. Earl Ulrich sniffed loud and looked around to meet the eyes of the boy. I know of them well by reputation. My father, Ivar the White, has fought with them before. And I will again if I must, Ivar said from his side. Is that so? Asked Ulrich of Lade, rising and standing square to where Ivar sat. As he sat by Harold, they were squared with each other. Enough, Harold said, though there was a laugh hidden in his words. Boys, please. There is no need to fight each other to the death in a holmgang this night. You are all my guests. The laws of hospitality govern this hall tonight, and I will allow no bloodshed. Any grievances you will have against each other shall bring to me, and we shall work to make a peace for you. This is now my kingdom, and I will rule you, lords. Rule you with might and hardness, if I must. But I will rule, and my rule will not go questioned, especially not in my hearing. He waited a moment. Is that understood? Aye, my lord king, they both said, though their stares at one another were still blazing in the heat of their fight. They sat back to their seats and calmed in posture. It's like governing children, you lords are. Many laughed, always quibbling and at each other. This is my kingdom? This is my king. This is my kingdom. Long has it been I have sought out this place, this seat, this power, and now here I am, sitting high over you squabbling lords. I think I shall propose a drink to this, to my kingdom, to all your fealty and respect to my kingdom, and to me with it, he said, and all raised their cups. To the king all drank, even Harold. The feast carried on in this way for the rest of the evening. Many of those in attendance drank and ate their fill, and for this Harold was satisfied. He'd not want a people who were so overly frightened of him they didn't want to risk poison, or to have their senses taken by the ale. They feasted in his hall and demonstrated trust in him in doing so. Harold stood, making certain that his chair scraped the floor loud as he did. The hall had grown rowdy by this time, and all were speaking to each other unreserved. Some turned to the seat and watched Harold as he picked up his goblet. Lord King, Hakon said, now thoroughly in his drink, sit down, the boy. You'll fall. The Jarl Ivar said with a laugh. Friends, my lords, my subjects, I must to bed. I have a kingdom to run in the morning, and you are all welcome to remain and revel and feast. But do me a favor, Harold said with a wave. The hall grew no quieter, but many were listening. I ask only that you continue these festivities in my honor. The whole hall cheered and raised sloshing cups of ale and mead to him, and all began to chant Harold's name and title as he took his wife Elisif's hands. They departed together and made for their chambers, which stood behind the great hall. Elisif shut the door behind them, and they were alone in the bedding chamber together. Harold turned to her with unmistakable lust in his eyes, and unclasped the royal cape he bore. She grinned back at him, and began to disrobe herself. My lord king is in a fine mood this night. You have not had too much to drink. He removed the belt from his breeches, and showed her his readiness and fine mood. Not at all, then. Hush now. Let us talk after. Ugh, more politics. I will need your body on mine first, then for certain. Harold removed his shoes and slipped the breeches full off and stood before her, naked now. My wise wife. He pulled her to. She pulled off her own clothes, and they stood before each other naked. I think. Don't! He interrupted and grabbed her. He slung her over his shoulder and then turned to throw her onto their bed. She giggled as she landed. Harold leapt on her, and they made love as king and queen. The utter satisfaction of his attained rule making every moment of fucking a queen that much better. Somehow, and he basked and gloried in the sensation. When they were done, they lay panting, legs and arms draped over each other's sweating forms. You have gotten better since being king, Elisif said. He looked over and regarded his wife. No more was she the shy girl princess that he'd had promised to him. Her strength and character had grown in the years, being aside a warlord and conquering hero king. Well, certainly don't tell anyone that, he said through pants. Any indication that I was ever at a point I could have improved from is not a sort of rumor I want traveling around this kingdom. He stood, disentangling himself from her, and walked to the table by their bed. Here he poured himself a cup of delicious wine. Roman, from Micklegard, he said, handing the cup to her. She took it and regarded it curiously. Why not drink from your own kingdom? Fell in love with the stuff while I was in the employ of the Emperor. His expression grew joyful. By God, that was a long time ago. He smirked at the memory. Now, you're dead, and I'm king. What a funny world God has planned out for his favorites. Oh, have a drink and find the reason I love it so much. She did as he said, and looked at the cup in surprise. Let us drink to my old friend. Here is for Michael the Paphlagonian. Why has this been the first time I've tasted this? She asked, and then took another greedy drink. Because this is the first time I have had any in a long time. I ordered some be brought here, and 2 barrels arrived yesterday. Well, she said after another drink, you may as well tell me what it is I have to hear. I'm fucked and drunk. Best place to tell me, King. He bit back his words a moment. When had his wife grown so aware of the world? You know of Giske? Of course, a powerful land in the north of your kingdom, and ruled by a family called the Gisketan. You are rule. I know, in name and title, but they have power, wealth, sway. I will need them to bring together this kingdom of Norway. What about the Danelands? I have plans for them too, but these are the lands I have to focus on first. I have had an author. Elisif sighed and drank again the wine. What's her name and when's the wedding? She asked, comprehending immediately. You! No! It is an obvious thing. When you say these things like this, I can know what it is. They have a daughter, and you will marry her, and this will bind together your kingdom. A man with 2 queens. What king doesn't want this thing? Harold regarded a moment, then nodded. It is the dream of all men, he agreed with a shrug. He drank more of the wine. All I need to know is will you plunge a dagger into my neck in the night? She shrugged. I don't think so. Will I remain queen? Of course you will. I love you, dear wife. That, and I do not want your father to come and make war on me for the slight of ousting you. That's not true. Of course it is. Yaroslav would bear down with his full force if he learned what I did. No, it is not true that you love me. You wanted me, you still do. But you love only one thing, husband. You love yourself. I know this for a long time. I think all kings do. So who is it? Harold sighed. Her name is Thora, Thorbergsdottir, of the family Gisketan. Sonor is their realm. It's the most powerful and wealthy land on the western part of the kingdom. I want to call mine. I need those lands to come under heel. They can make such a navy with their command of the fjords and the forests there. I cannot have them as rivals or enemies, but with a marriage to this Dora, I will instead have them as a strong ally to my rule. I understand. You are king now. Why need you an ally? I don't understand. You are king now. Why need you an ally in your own country? Harold nodded and drank from the wine. I need allies more than anyone else. Kingship, rule. It is making and maintaining the devotions and allegiances, taxation, fear, and promise of war and conquest of others. And, unfortunately, unions within and amongst to keep this kingdom of a kingdom, the concept of a kingdom together. You need war? Of course, especially these people. War and raiding is a way of life. I can't tell them that we are going to try and to scratch out enough crops from the lands to keep everyone fed. But they need to know that their strength and power will be asserted by a strong king. Better to make them happy and drunk on the blood of the weak by promising that we are going to loot and win plunder from our enemies until they make themselves our subject, and then have them join us on our more conquests. You are making a distraction of this. When are you getting married to this Hora person? She emphasized the word whore. Careful, woman. There's no benefit to you in getting so territorial. I am king. Elisif sighed. Very well, then. You should know that all women are more territorial than the men that I'm on. It is the ugliest thing about your kind. He sighed again. I should not have said that. The wedding should be done this year. I want this alliance solidified and done as soon as possible, that this rule can begin in earnest. And then what? Then I think I shall go back. A debt I owe. to pay a debt that I owe to Svein Olfsen, the king in Denmark. He said the last word as a mockery. The rest he meant in all seriousness. He felt still a debt was owed and wanted to pay it back over twice. End of chapter 37. From here and now, you will probably notice that I have done these chapters listed as, or the title of these chapters are listed as years. This first one was 1048. Apparently, this meeting between Einar Darmbalskerfir and all the lords in this hall, apparently, this is something that actually happened. Very interesting to find out. I really liked writing Harold, as I've mentioned a dozen times, no doubt. Harold Sigurdsson, Harold Hardrada, what a character he was. Yeah, and the solidification of his rule and all these things, fascinating stuff. So, yeah, chapter 37. Thank you all so much for joining me.